to this new optionality that the USS Ford Carrier Strike Group gives to the president when dealing with these terrorist organizations down south, that the interdiction operation that we're seeing out in really Tren de Aragua and so many others of the cartels that are coming up out of Venezuela. Now, that being said, there have been some questions and I think legitimate concerns as well that if land strikes do occur, does the Maduro regime view that as an attack on them? And if so, do they escalate? Because we know that there have definitely been some demonstrated overlap and demonstrated ties between certain members of the Maduro regime and Tren de Aragua. So that being said, if these land strikes do occur, what are some of the ways that Maduro could respond to this?
Well, this is probably the most important question. And, going back to what we were discussing in the previous segment, to conduct those land strikes, I think that you are going to have to conduct some type of suppression of enemy air defense mission. Because, again, Venezuela does have a modern Russian-built air defense system. And that's, I think, one of the reasons the Ford is being moved in, not because anybody's made a firm decision, but, again, to give the president options. And I think considering the whole ideology behind the Maduro regime, which it is a Marxist regime, but it's also rooted in this Bolivarian nationalism, this whole idea that they threw off imperialism from the Europeans, and now the threat from imperialism is from the Yankees. But I think that there is always a risk that Maduro or his cartel allies would have to retaliate in some way. That could be retaliation against military assets the United States has in the Caribbean. It could, God forbid, include retaliation against our homeland. Again, nothing is guaranteed. Nothing is set in stone. But those are the range of different things that could occur. And I know there's a lot of smart people at DOD and DHS thinking through that and hopefully preparing for that. But it is important to know that type of escalation could be met with blowback in that regard.
Right. And by the way, so that's, that you're talking about blowback, not just from, so the Maduro regime, again, serious military, Russian-backed, Chinese-backed, serious air defense. And so, good chance that, we're not going to. Now, and by the way, this is why when we flew those B-2 bombers over, when the president ordered that Operation Midnight Hammer over Iran, that's why he did it after Israel and the Israeli Air Force had already conducted those operations to destroy the air defense. They were so degraded that it provided the president with an opportunity to do so. We don't have that situation here, so it would have to be American aircraft of some sort flying that operation.
That is correct. And also remember during Operation Midnight Hammer is that there was over 100 aircraft, including 4th and 5th gen fighters going into Iran, a lot of supporting aircraft in the Persian Gulf, AWACS aircraft, intelligence aircraft, probably electronic warfare aircraft in support of those 14 B-2 bombers going in. And so while the Venezuelan air defense network probably isn't overall more robust as the Iranians, to your point, it has not been degraded. So to do that would require a major operation in and of itself before you would have any type of significant land campaign.
I think that's exactly right. And I think people have to understand that this isn't, it's not video game logic, right? You can't just, I'm going to call in a bombing. No, that's not how that works. All of this requires serious planning. All of this requires serious effort. And we certainly have a serious military. And so the questions, of course, come down to, do we want to bite that off? Do we want to go in that far? Is this really what the American people are going to want? And by the way, when you mentioned blowback, I wanted to step on that for a second, because the cartels themselves, not just the Venezuelan Tren de Aragua, but also the cartels out of El Salvador, MS-13, the cartels out of Mexico, Jalisco New Cartel, and others. These are serious players. I was saying earlier in the opening that some of the worst videos I've ever seen online are the cartel videos. The violence, the just insane levels of depravity. It's far worse than anything. You can, I'll pay to show Chris Hayes or anyone who wants the Telegram pages where you can go find this stuff, and I definitely get fined if I'm playing those videos right now. But they are going to bring that north of the border. They really are. I mean, is the United States prepared to deal with that kind of blowback?
I hope so. Again, credit to this administration. We've really locked down the border. Again, the Department of War is playing a key part in that. And I think that's appropriate use of Department of War. They are definitely more aware and awake to this threat than the previous administration was, for sure. But again, these are organizations that are embedded and have tentacles throughout our country, not just in the southern states, not just in Arizona where I grew up, but across the country. And they are a much bigger threat than the remnants of ISIS and Al Qaeda, and have more capability than those threats. Unfortunately, for a long time, for over 20 years, we devoted far more resources to, really after 2011, after we killed bin Laden, and after President Trump destroyed the ISIS caliphate. We've devoted even then far more resources to those threats than the ones in our backyard. And Jack, I just got to say, that makes this situation much more complicated. It is not as black and white to say, okay, this is us getting into yet another stupid war in the Middle East. This is our backyard. And there are real threats and interests at stake. So it's not as clear. It's not as like, okay, this is another stupid war. There are things we have to do here to keep ourselves safe. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge that there are real risks of escalation, and we could do something that in the long term actually makes certain things worse in our own hemisphere.